begin our October 2024 Maryland Higher Education Commission meeting. We do have a quorum with 8 of our 12 commissioners present. For the record, we have Commissioners Agu, Bands, Burnham, Howe, Thompson, Williams, Warmack, and Motts. The first order of business is remarks from the Secretary and me. I know Secretary Rye has been very busy, and I will turn it over to him.
Thank you, Chair Moss. Thank you, Commissioners. As you can see, Dr. Dow and I are at the University of Maryland's Idea Factory. We are here to talk about aerospace industry's workforce needs. Lieutenant Governor will be here a little bit later on. So we are excited to be part of this conversation. I know we have a pretty, full agenda today. Budget items, capital budgets, operating budgets, and certainly our post-2025 draft academic goals that we will be presenting today, and duplication analysis and several other regulatory matters. So Chair Martz, in the interest of time, I would like to get just started. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Rye. The only thing I would add is that we are very much looking forward to getting input from the higher education community on the draft goals that will be presented for the first time today at our summit, our Student Success Summit at the Universities at Shady Grove. The summit is entitled Harnessing Maryland's Potential Through Student Success, and it will be on Friday, November 15th, again at the Universities at Shady Grove. All institutions of higher education have been invited, and we have a strong RSVP list with almost all of the college presidents attending, and the commissioners. Hopefully, it is on your radar as well. We will follow up with a more detailed agenda in the days to come, but we're looking forward to that. The next order of business is public comments, and I believe for the first time in my 15 months on the commission, we actually have some public comments. So I will turn it over to Dr. Brad Phillips from the Maryland Association of Community Colleges. Dr. Phillips?
Let me make sure I have all myself together here and unmuted and on camera. I just want to speak very briefly in support of the completion post-2025 goals. I'm very excited to see the inclusion of some of the work that we do at community colleges that has not been a part of that process in the past. I really do think since the time in which we set the previous round of goals, we have come a long way in capturing outcomes and data on our continuing education students. And we're just, I think, really thrilled to be able to see them as a part of this process and as a part of the sort of pathways for Marylanders to get good jobs in an affordable way. And I'm really just looking forward to the summit and the year ahead and working on these goals. So with that, that's really all I have to say, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for letting me speak.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Phillips. We also have a comment from Dr. Allison Rinn from the University System of Maryland. Dr. Rinn, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to provide the public comment on behalf of the University System of Maryland on the critical issue of draft statewide goals for higher education. First, the goal related to addressing inequities and completion. We absolutely support the idea of eliminating equity gaps. However, it's critical to consider the equity gaps that may emerge in credential of value attainment as well. Are we setting up potentially a two-tier system that tracks certain students from certain groups into one lane or another? So we ask that MHEC pay close attention to these matters and publicly commit to sharing data on a regular basis so that every student has the ability and funding can pursue the highest level of academic achievement that they desire. Second, we do support the creation of a revised attainment goal that includes credentials of value. However, we also believe the completion of an associate's or bachelor's degree is still a critical indicator of success. So we ask the state continue to seek an attainment goal of at least 55% in associate's and bachelor's degrees, and add on top of that to send us up to 65% the credentials of value. Third, the addition of research and innovation goals. This is aligned with the University System of Maryland very closely. We are the public system of higher education in Maryland, and our institutions focused on what's good for the students, what's good for the state of Maryland. Our VPs of research are very interested in understanding more about this goal, and we ask that you continue to work with them and ensure that there's no negative impacts in their very complex worlds of federal research. And so that's a commitment we ask for. And finally, we stand ready to partner with you over the next year as these draft goals evolve. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Rinn, for those very thoughtful comments. I don't believe there are any other public comments, so we will move.
Chair Martz, I just
Yes.
want to add that first, I want to thank Dr. Rinn and Dr. Phillips for their commitment and for their support on these goals, and also their involvement and involvement of entire higher education community in coming up with these draft goals so far. And again, we will all work collaboratively in further defining these goals and setting some of the baseline benchmarks as Dr. Rinn and Dr. Phillips have suggested. We have also invited MICUA, private independent universities. They are also supportive, but because of personal reason, Mr. Powers is not able to join us at this meeting, but they will be participating in our summit on November 14th and November 15th, both. We are looking forward to working with the entire higher education community in taking this further. Thank you again.
Thanks, Dr. Ryan. And I agree. Huge thank you to not only for your comments today, Dr. Phillips and Dr. Rinn, but for your participation. Also, a big thank you to my colleagues on the commission, Commissioner Agu, and I believe Commissioner Dukes, Williams, and Tabor Stalen have been part of the committee working very hard on these goals. And when we get to this agenda item later, I know Commissioner Agu and perhaps others will make some further comments addressing some of the public comments that were shared. So thank you all very much. This has been a collaborative effort, a massive undertaking, and we look forward to getting even more input from the community at the summit on November 15th. The next order of business is approval of minutes from our last two meetings. I'll start with the August 28th, 2024 meeting. These minutes were shared in advance. Is there a motion from one of my fellow commissioners to approve the August 28th minutes?
Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Powell?
I move that we approve the August 28th, 2024 minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner Burnham. Is there a second?
Second.
Excellent. All those in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
For the record, they're all ayes. Any nays or abstentions? All right. Thank you. Similarly, is there a motion to approve the September 18th, 2024 minutes? Commissioner Howe is raising her hand.
Second.
Second from Commissioner Burnham. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Any nays or abstentions? All right. Thank you. They were also unanimously approved. We'll now turn the floor over to Mr. Jeffrey Newman, who leads the Department of Finance and Administration for the agency.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners, Mr. Secretary. I am here to discuss, to give you a presentation on funding for fiscal 25 for higher education and to have you make recommendations for funding for fiscal 2026. So if you'll look at page 10 in your book, you'll see that funding provided to higher education was over $3.2 billion in fiscal 2025. And on page 11, you'll see a table and pie chart showing the allocation of the funding to the different segments of higher education. Funding to the four-year publics was 73%. Community colleges was 16.2%. Funding through the Selinger program was 2.2%. The Office of Student Financial Assistance at MHEC received 6.5%. And all the funding for all the other pass-through grants, Administration of Higher Education Commission represents the remaining 2%. Now, funds for the University System of Maryland and Morgan State University's operating budgets are made through the deliberative process of submitting budget requests to DBM and then discussing their budgets through budget meetings from the fall through December of each year. And as shown in Table 1, USM received $2.2 billion in state funds, and Morgan State received $168 million. Funding to St. Mary's College, community colleges, and the independent institutions are provided in formulas designated for each segment. Fiscal 2025, St. Mary's College received an appropriation of $39.4 million. The local community colleges received $475.5 million through the CADE formula and additional grants and retirement funding. The state contributes to the faculty and staff retirement plans for community college employees. So that's what that portion represents. And Baltimore City Community College, which is a state university or state college, not a locally based community college, received $48.3 million. In financial aid, the commission received over $189 million in general and special fund support for student financial assistance in 2025. Financial aid applications in 2024 totaled 193,245, I'm sorry, in fiscal 2025, which was a decrease of 7.5% from fiscal 2024. However, MHEC continues to receive FAFSA records from the U.S. Department of Education, and we're still working out making awards to eligible students. As a result of I think you're all pretty much familiar with this, but as a result of the FAFSA delay that we had from the federal government this year, we had to extend the deadline from March 1st to June 1st, 2024 this year. And for fiscal 2025, approximately 20,339 applicants have been awarded a Howard P. Rawlings Educational Excellence Award for a total of $184 million, and that consists of the Guaranteed Access Grant and the Educational Assistance Grant. I've provided some statistics of what has been happening with those grants in early October. Excuse me. We are providing updates on a weekly basis. Unfortunately, Al Dorset is not here today. He's up in Portland, Maine for a NASGAP meeting, which is a National Association of Student Aid Administrators. But for fiscal 2025, $145 million has been budgeted for the Howard P. Rawlings Educational Excellence Awards program, and we have awarded all funds, and we're currently monitoring for cancellations or rejected awards, and as soon as we get those, we are trying to turn around and make awards to eligible students. The Promise Scholarship, as you know, is a last dollar scholarship program providing $5,000 to community college students who are eligible. For fiscal 2025, Commission received $15 million in general funds for the Promise Scholarship. And per legislative provisions, we are now allocating Promise Scholarship money to each Maryland community college based on the percentage of enrolled students who receive a federal Pell Grant. We're giving them their first installment in the fall, and then we will be giving them their second installment in January. And if adjustments are needed to be made to those allocations, we will make those adjustments and then give them to the community colleges. And those adjustments mean if a community college is coming in under what they thought they needed to spend to make awards in the Promise Scholarship, they'll return funding to MHEC, and MHEC will reallocate the money to other community colleges who are over awarding what they projected, what what the allocation based on the Pell Grant population would provide. So we will try to balance it out, give those colleges that are awarding more funding in the Promise Scholarship more funds, and take the funding from those colleges that are not awarding funds. And now I'd like to turn it over to Sam Pandian. Sam, are you here to talk about the MHEC budget?
Yes. Good morning, Chair Mods, Commissioners, Dr. Roy, and everyone. I'm here to present Maryland Higher Education Commission's operating budget. So for fiscal year 2025, MHEC received appropriation of $796 million. This marks an 8.6% decrease from the previous year, necessitated by statewide budget reduction. The majority of the cutbacks impacted formula grants programs, the Salinger formula for aid to non-public higher education institution, and CATE funding formula, and various educational grant programs. So we have I'm going to present now the segments of the total budget. For administration, we received like 11,469,683, which is 1% of the total appropriation what we received. That is for our operational cost and administration cost. And for grant programs, $626,954,565, which is 79% of the total budget, belongs to grant programs. And we have $11,095,000 for loan assistance repayment programs, which is 1% of the total budget, and $69,709,932 for retirement payments to community colleges, which is 9% of the total budget, and $77,589,929 for various scholarship programs, which is 10% of our total budget. So overall, our fiscal year 2025 budget is $796,819,109. So the largest share of our budget, about 79%, is dedicated to support public community colleges and non-public institutions. This includes funding through the CAPE funding formula, the Salinger formula for non-public institutions, and various educational grants programs. These funds aim to enhance academic programs, upgrade campus facilities, and support research initiatives. Approximately 10% of the budget is allocated to student support through scholarship programs such as Delegate Scholarship, Senatorial, Conroy Memorial Scholarship, Prayer Memorial Scholarship, and Promise Scholarship. Additionally, 9% of the budget is earmarked for eligible teachers' retirement payments and reimbursement for optional retirement costs, while 1% is allocated to loan assistance repayment programs. The remaining 1% covers various operational costs, including salary and benefit for our dedicated staffs, technology upgrade, and other administrative expenses. We recognize that these are challenging economic times, and we are committed to using our resources wisely. We have implemented cost-saving measures across all areas and strive to maintain the lean and efficient operations. Thank you.
So with that, the commission is asked to comment on priorities for funding for higher education in the fiscal 2026. And as we did last year, these are very similar to what we recommended last year. It's recommended that the Maryland Higher Education Commission adopt that the following funding priorities be used in targeting funding for higher education in fiscal 2026. One is funding to support the Maryland Higher Education Commission general administration budget as it continues to implement new programs, add new staff, modify existing programs, and examine its operations to increase automation of application and management programs. The next is funding to support new and existing programs of financial assistance, especially existing programs which have received significant changes through legislation over the last few years, including the EEA programs and the Promise program, brought forward by the Governor and General Assembly, as well as to support the development of a new financial aid system. which is underway. Continue to support to formula-funded institutions and segments in line with the appropriations provided to the public four-year colleges and universities in accordance with the calculation methodologies provided in statute to the extent possible, and to the extent possible, provide even funding through each segment of higher education. And that concludes our presentation.
Thanks, Mr. Newman.
Thank
Any
you.
questions or comments? Commissioner Serrano, and then Commissioner Agu.
Yeah, I just had a quick question regarding the Rollins guaranteed act grant. And so
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit, like, so from my understanding is the number of students who have applied for it has increased, but the funding for it has decreased. Is that correct?
The funding hasn't decreased. The funding has remained the same. We're getting much more because of relaxed requirements that occurred through legislation in 2023. We're receiving a large number of applicants and making a greater number of awards. So while the funding to the program funds both the guaranteed access and educational assistance awards. So what happens is if the funding remains flat, but the need for funding guaranteed access students rises, that pulls away money from the education assistance grant program.
So will increase? I mean, are we at risk of running out of money for this? And then the other thing is, like, to what extent is that impacted by the kind of the FAFSA kind of at the federal level?
Well, as I mentioned, we have used up the money for the program with the awards that we have made so far. So that will, to increase the GA group of students receiving awards, that will use the majority of the funding for the EA program. All we're funding now are EA renewal students. We have not made any EA initial awards.
Okay.
We have not been able to.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Agu, and then Commissioner Burnham.
Sure. Thank you so much for the presentation, Jeff and team. Less a comment on what was presented. I think what you put forward makes sense. I would probably more make a process point for the future, which is as we'll get to the draft goals, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but the ideal would be as we as a commission think about our priorities, ideally in the future, we would think about how our funding priorities would reflect our goals and reflect our plan.
Yes.
And ideally, we would be able to crosswalk those two things going forward. Again, we're in process now, so that would not be fungible now. But I would just make that point going forward. Ideally, everything would align from process to budget, as well as actually the substance of what institutions are doing. So I just want to name that out loud.
Yep.
I think all things you say are reasonable, and in many ways, what you named are the levers by which we will get to some of those goals. But I did just want to think about for our commission in the future, how will this relate to our goals? And ideally, we can say our funding priorities are going to help our goals move forward and be properly attained in the time frame. So just naming that, and happy to go back to I believe Commissioner Burnham is next.
Yes, and just to react, as you see, we do look at the state plan goals when
Right.
we are looking at the budget. So as these change and as we get our new completion goals, in place, that will definitely be a focus of the budget to be consistent with these new goals and that the commission is developing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Commissioner
Thank you.
Burnham.
I believe, well, good morning, all. I just have a question about the recommendations. The last one says, to the extent possible, provide even funding to each higher ed segment. Am I correct in assuming that by even we mean consistent from year to year, or just what is meant by even there?
Yes, and that might not have been the best word to use, maybe equitable, or that means funding among the segments to make sure that we have a system of funding where at this point in time, funding to the community colleges and Sellinger programs is based on funding provided to the public four-year institutions. Our goal is to try to keep that connection.
Okay.
That's proven to be a pretty effective way of funding higher education over the many years that we've been doing it that way. So it was really meant to just say, you know, if you're going to consider making reductions in one segment, you know, consider what you could do to make it equitable among
Okay.
all segments.
All right, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Equity is a concern there. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Williams?
Yes, thank you. I had the same question as Commissioner Burnham. And with that, perhaps we want to think about clarifying that last statement. One interpretation might be even from one fiscal year to the next, as opposed to equity among all, all segments of higher education. So I would recommend that we be more
Would you like
specific.
to reword it?
Thank you.
Provide equitable funding among the segments of higher education.
Okay,
I think that would work.
good suggestion. Other suggestions or comments? All right, so Mr. Newman, you need us to vote on this?
Yes, please.
All right, so I guess it makes most sense for me to just read the recommendation with the new language and then ask for a vote?
Yes.
Okay, so do we have a motion to approve the agency's recommendation that the Maryland Higher Education Commission adopt the following funding priorities to be used in targeted funding for higher education for fiscal year 2026? 1, funding to support the Maryland Higher Education Commission General Administration budget as it continues to implement new programs, add new staff, modify existing programs, and examine its operations to increase automation of application and management programs. Number 2, funding to support new and existing programs of student financial assistance and changes to existing programs brought forward by the Governor and General Assembly, as well as to support the development of a new financial aid system. Number 3, continued support to formula-funded institutions and segments in line with the appropriations provided to the public four-year colleges and universities in accordance with the calculation methodologies provided in statute to the extent possible. And number 4, to the extent possible, provide equitable funding among each segment of higher education. Do we have a motion?
I move approval.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Second.
All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
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 Any nays or abstentions? All right. And then moving on to the.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Is there any discussion or questions with respect to the capital budget recommendation?
Well, Al, I have Dan Schuster here to walk you through that.
Oh, good. Sorry, I was just excited about what I read. I guess we need that presentation too. I'm sorry, Mr.
No
Schuster.
problem.
We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to everybody. For the record, my name is Dan Schuster. I am the Capital Finance Analyst here at MHEC, and I will be talking about the capital budget recommendations for FY26. Forgive me for a moment. I'm trying to share my screen. In your packets, you do have a memo that we prepared. That is not the right screen, is it? We do have a packet that I prepared that talks about what the requests were from each of the segments, in addition to how those requests fell in line with the CIP or not. And following that, there are, in the appendix to the memo, there are some descriptions of what each of the projects entails, and gives a little bit more detail and context there. That memo is basically for your information. Today, I'm not really going to spend too much time talking about it. If you do have questions, certainly you may ask them either now or offline some other time. But what I wanted to spend my time discussing here today, especially because our recommendations, as you'll see in the memo, are essentially to stick with what's planned in the capital improvement plan documents, is to talk a little bit about the process for capital budgeting, how that capital plan comes to be. Hopefully that will give you some context to why we typically always recommend sticking with what's in the capital plan. So first thing, hopefully, that I can help you guys understand is that capital projects, when they're funded over the course of many years. The design phase itself, which is the least expensive part of the project, that'll take 12 to 18 months, sometimes even longer than that, before you move into the expensive part, which is the construction, and that process will take a couple of years as well. And a project is funded based on the cash flow needs of all of those phases, equipment being funded typically concurrently within the last year or two of construction. And so projects, when they're funded, they're usually funded over the course, especially the big ones, over the course of maybe 5 fiscal years or even more. I do have a couple of examples that I could show you to hopefully illustrate that point. This one here is the Howard Community College Math and Athletics Complex project that's actually just being completed right now. It's about $100 million, a little bit more. And that $100 million was funded over the course of 5 fiscal years, starting at FY20 and moving through to FY24. As you can see, when it initially was funded back in FY20 for design, P stands for planning or design phase, it only got a couple $1 million. Design continued the next year, and that's when construction funding started. And as you can see, once you get into construction, that's where the bulk of the dollars are. They got about 25 to 30 million over the last 3 years of that project, which is pretty typical. Here's another one. This is the University of Maryland, Baltimore new School of Social Work building. Current plan anyway is for this project, which current estimates are about 121 million for that project to be funded over the course of 6 fiscal years. You can see initial funding for this started in FY22. They got a couple $1 million a year for design. That design has taken a while. For this one, a few years. Finally, this year, FY25, that's when construction is supposed to start, and then the plan being to fund the bulk of the dollars in the next couple of years, where you can see the funding is planned to go up to $40 and $50 million a year for the next couple of years to fund that project. So hopefully that helps illustrate a couple of things. First being that for capital projects, since they're funded over the course of so many years, it's not sufficient to just budget 1 year at a time. You really have to budget 5 years at a time. And that's what's done in the capital improvement plan document, or the CIP. The CIP is updated annually. It's released each January when the governor's budget is sent to the assembly, and it includes the actual funds to be adopted in the next year, plus the planned funds for the 4 years after. So the current CIP that I'm talking about is the one that was released last January that had funds for FY25. Obviously, that budget's been passed. And it also had the planned funds for 26 through 29.
Mr. Schuster?
Yes.
This is Ray. I just had a quick question. So on the amounts that we're talking about, is this state funding solely, or maybe?
So this one here is all state funded for USM schools. This guy here is the total project funding, which for Howard happened to be 50-50 split.
And is there anyone tracking like federal funding? Like, are any of these institutions applying for like like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act or Inflation Reduction Act? There's a lot of money that's going out for certain projects like this.
So what I'm talking about here today are state funded projects. There are other projects that get done that are not part of the state budget, including projects that the schools fund themselves and or get grants and other things for. But this is what I'm talking about today is the process for funding a state funded project.
But are we tracking any the amount of monies that these institutions are getting from a federal level or outside donor or funding?
I don't have that information specifically. There are probably folks in DBM and elsewhere in the state that have more information than I do on some of that.
Okay. And even if we did have that information, it wouldn't impact our application.
Correct. It will not impact our recommendations for the state funded projects.
Okay.
Commissioner Agu?
Yes, this actually, I was going to save this for later, but this is actually an adjacent question. And Mr. Schuster, this also doesn't reflect any bonded debt, anything that folks might use to build things as well. This is purely fiscal allocations.
Well, when you say bonded, most of the state projects are borrowed state money. What it does not include is the projects, for example, that the USM may bond on its own, like dorms and that sort of thing.
Got it. So, yeah, so these funds are a combination of appropriations as well as money that's come in from debt that the state has floated.
Right. So most years, most of the capital budget is funded through GO bonds, which is general obligation bonds, which is borrowed money. The last couple of years, 23, 24, primarily, there was a lot of cash the state had on hand, and a lot of capital projects were funded with that cash PAYGO funds, but that funding source isn't really available going forward for a number of reasons, and so most of these projects are going to be funded with bond funds.
So this gets to the actual, because I think I asked you this question last year, which was, as the interest rate environment changes, I'm just curious how that affects your analysis. Debt, hopefully, money will become hopefully a little cheaper in the ongoing years. Does that affect this analysis at all?
Well, it certainly affects what the state capacity is for borrowing money, and that's something that is not really MHEC concern. The state has other groups that look at what the state bonding capacity is and make recommendations on that, and then therefore that informs how much capacity is in the overall budget, which informs what's going to be put in the CIP by DBM and the governor's office and so forth.
I'm just curious, for those GO bonds, what's the usual length of the bond in terms of a time period? I'm just curious.
You're supposed to spend the money within 7 years after it's authorized.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So, Mr. Schuster, is it fair to say that MHEC works very closely with the state's Department of Budget Management on the capital improvement plan? So we play a relatively small role with respect to our recommendations here. This has been thoroughly vetted and analyzed by several analysts and the leaders of the budget department.
Correct. And as you'll see when I go through the rest of my presentation, I'm hopefully going to describe some of what is involved in all of that. And so if I can, please let me move on, and then we'll have some more questions at the end. I'll be happy to entertain them.
Yeah, I think it's so many of us, myself included, we've been only at this a little more than a year. And so
right.
This is very helpful background, but I think it's also reassuring to us that the state's Department of Budget Management is very focused on this. And as you mentioned, there are long-term plans involved with this. So that it sounds like your recommendation is to just go ahead with what's already been included for the fiscal 26 capital improvement plan.
Correct. And that's why I'm going to be talking a little bit more here in these next few slides about that process. So hopefully it provides you some context with how the plan is developed.
Okay, thank you.
So the other thing, hopefully, that you saw from those slides is that the bulk of the funding in any 1 year that you're talking about is always going to be tied up with projects that are undergoing construction. That's where the bulk of the cost is. And so those ongoing projects are always going to be the priority in the upcoming year. You need to finish what you started. You're not going to spend $10 million on design only to put that plan on a shelf and not actually build something. You're certainly not going to start construction on a project and then, leave a big hole in the ground or something. You want to be able to complete what you started, even if the cost for that project increase significantly, which sometimes they do, especially the last couple of years with the inflation that we've seen. And so you had to figure out ways to absorb those increases within the capacity of the upcoming year's budget. And there's ways that you can do that in capital budgeting. One thing to understand is that when you're talking about projects and capital budgeting, you're talking about managing schedules just as much as you are talking about managing dollars. And so obviously you have a planned schedule for the project, but that may change over the course of time. You might get into design phase and run into issues that you need to solve that could delay the start of construction. When you get into construction phase, you might have procurement issues, or you might have permitting issues, or weather delays, or any number of things that can push the schedule back in time. And when that happens, of course, the dollars associated with that get pushed back in time, and that tends to free up some money in the next year for ongoing projects that had cost increases. A lot of times that's not enough. And sometimes those that are doing the budget do have to do things like defer a project. If it was planned to start in FY26 for design, maybe it can't start till 27. Or maybe the construction gets pushed back 6 months or something like that. It doesn't have a huge impact in the grand scheme of things because these projects are going to last 25, 30 years. But it does free up a lot of money significantly if there's cost increases associated with other projects.
Mr. Schuster, can I jump in? One of our commissioners has a question and she was unable to unmute. Could you explain how inflation is taken into account?
So DBM typically tells people which rates to plan for inflation for upcoming years based on their analysis of market trends and so forth. Sometimes they're accurate, sometimes they're not, but obviously when you're talking about future costs, you got to take those into consideration in your cost estimates. And so cost estimates for projects are adjusted annually because of that, and because of the schedule changes, that's obviously going to change the inflation rate as well. And so that's why costs increase have to be planned from year to year. And another reason why that CIP has to be updated annually for ongoing projects, and you have to figure out how to assume those cost increases for the current projects. But hopefully what you can understand with all of that is that, if you had to worry about deferring costs or deferring projects that are priorities to pay for the ongoing costs of projects under construction, then it's going to be very difficult to jam a new project in there that hasn't been planned. Okay, and so except in rare circumstances will you ever see a project that's not in the current CIP be inserted into the first or second year of the next CIP. It's probably going to go in years 4 or 5. And likewise, if there's a project plan for 28, it's probably not going to be able to be accelerated to 26. It's probably going to have to wait until at least 28 before you're going to start that, just because the budget capacity for the next year is usually swallowed up by construction of ongoing projects. So next thing I want to talk about is how do you get a project into the CIP in the first place? And that is through the submission of what's called a facility program. Comes to part 1 and part 2, which I'll talk about in a second. And these are required submissions for all state agencies, including higher ed, including four-year and community colleges. And we're talking about FY26 today, but just so that you understand, if you're planning to request funds for a project to start in FY27, you would have had to submit these documents a long time ago. And so if you're a state agency, that part 1 document should have been submitted to DBM back in 2021. They've been reviewing it since then. And a part 2 document should be submitted very soon so that you can ask for money during the budget cycle next year. And so these projects are under review for a period of time before a project gets inserted again into usually years 4 or 5 of the CIP. So what's in these documents? Part 1 document, this is basically your justification for the project. It's going to include a description of what the problem is that you're trying to solve, whether it's we don't have enough space, or whether it's the space that we do have is not sufficient, not designed for how it's being used currently, or maybe there's accessibility issues, or maybe the building is just old and falling apart. Whatever the problem is, you have to describe what it is, hopefully using quantitative data. And then you got to talk about, okay, what are the consequences of that problem? Who's going to get hurt by that? And what's going to happen to them?
Mr. Schuster, if I could jump in, one of our commissioners has a question. Commissioner Thompson?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Schuster, regarding the previous slide when you spoke about years 4 and 5. So what happens between years 1 and 3? Is that when the planning takes place, or are you saying that
So what I'm talking about is
are you saying that year 4 or 5 is where the planning starts?
So again, the CIP has 4 years or 5 years worth of planned money in there. And what I'm talking about is the initial funds for that project. The initial design for that project is not going to start for another 4 or 5 years. So in other words, let's say you have a project that's not in the current CIP. You're trying to get it into a CIP, into the state plan. You're going to submit a program document, which I'm talking about now. The state's going to review that, and they're probably going to say, okay, yep, this makes sense to fund. Let's fund it in FY29 or FY30. And that's when you're going to start the design phase, move into construction after that.
Okay. Thank you for that clarity.
No problem. So back to the part 1. So after you describe what the consequences are, now you got to talk about what are some ways that we can solve that problem, including maybe there's some things we can do operationally without a capital project to hopefully resolve the issues. And then also talk about a couple of different capital projects that might address the problem. And then you come to the conclusion of, okay, this is the one that makes the most sense considering everything. That's your justification for the project. Part 2 is a much more technical document. These are your instructions to the architect. You're going to talk about the scope of the work in a lot more detail, including what are the requirements of the building systems and the capacities that they need to handle. What are the building codes and other regulations that need to be followed by the architects that are designing this project? You're talking about the spaces themselves within the project. Who's going to be using them? Who do they have to be next to? What's all the equipment that's going to go into that space? The amenities, the furnishings, all of that stuff has to be specified. And then you have to figure out what the costs are associated with that and estimate those costs. So again, this is a very highly technical document. Usually it requires architects and engineers to produce this. And the good ones, they're actually spending $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 just on these program documents before they even can start to ask for funds, capital funds for a project. And so the point that hopefully I'm making is that with the Part 1 documents, they're submitted, and that's how the state understands what the problem is. And that problem is well established before a project is planned in the CIP in the first place. And then the Part 2 documents are submitted, and then the scope is well defined and the costs are well understood before you actually go and request funds for a project. Okay, so all of this stuff takes years to get to this point. So then, obviously now we're talking about FY26. So for the most part, all of this stuff that I'm talking about now with the program has already occurred for these projects. Okay, and if you look through the agenda materials, you'll see that there's info on each of the projects that were requested and whether those projects are included in the CIP and so forth. And you'll see for the most part, okay, the requests are going to be consistent with what's in the CIP, as you could expect. There are a couple exceptions, of course, for some schools that might be asking for funds that aren't planned in 26. Again, this is all just part of the process. But what I would like to let you know is that if they can demonstrate what the needs are and that there are needs there, the projects will be included in the CIP in the future. That's how the process works. Even if they can't be accommodated in the upcoming year, they will be accommodated. if the need has been demonstrated successfully in those program documents. And this is the last chart that I'll show now before we go into the recommendations to hopefully illustrate that point. This is what we're looking at is the percentage of total higher education capital funds by each of the segments that are making the request. Which percent of the pie were they getting? And you can see this one column is the actual amounts that were authorized in the budgets over the last 25 years or so, followed by there's columns for what's in the current CIP, how much of the money are they getting in each of the next 4 years. And I highlight a couple of the schools that do have well-documented facilities needs that need to be addressed. And you can see Baltimore City Community College only got about 1% of the capital funds over the last 25 years, but the plan is 2% in 26, up to 5% in 27, 10% in 28, and so forth. Morgan State, we got about 9.5% over the last 25 years. Plan is for them to get 19% in 26, up to 28% in 27, and 34% in 28, which you can see is actually more than the plan is currently for that year anyway, for them to get more money than all of the USM schools combined. And so what that's telling me is that the current CIP does have a lot of investment for these schools that are have demonstrated needs. And so therefore that's another reason why we should stick with what's in the CIP for now. We will address those needs eventually, even if they're not going to be necessarily able to address them directly in the next year or so forth. So with that, I'll pause before we go into the recommendations to see if there's any questions on any of that process beyond what I've already hopefully tried to answer.
Any questions or comments from the commissioners? All right, thanks, Mr. Schuster. I guess we're ready for a motion. Do we have a motion for our commission to approve?
Would you like me?
Do you want to just read it?
Yeah, I was going to say, would you like me to just read these in for the record and then somebody can make a motion?
Sure. Just save me the reading. I would love that. Thank you.
Okay. So it is recommended that the Maryland Higher Education Commission make the following recommendations for the fiscal year 26 capital budget. Approval of the $70 million planned in the CIP for the Community College Construction Grant Program. Approval of the Community College Facilities Renewal Grant funding request of $3.5 million, consistent with statutory formula. Approval of FY26 funding for projects planned in the CIP for Baltimore City Community College, University System of Maryland, Morgan State University, and St. Mary's College of Maryland. And the approval of the $8 million planned in the CIP for MACUA FY26 capital budget.
Do we have a motion to
Madam Chair,
approve the recommendation that Mr. Schuster just shared?
Madam Chair, I move approval.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Commissioner Thompson, I think you're raising your hand for a second. Yes.
Okay.
All those in favor say aye or raise your hand, please. Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? All right, it's unanimously approved. Thank you, Mr. Schuster.
Thank you all.
Moving through the agenda, the next topic is the draft statewide goals for higher education, about which there's already been some conversation. I see Dr. Dow on the agenda, and I also, again, wanted to thank Commissioner Agu, who's been joined by Commissioner Dukes, Williams, and Tabor-Stalen for doing significant work on this. Commissioner Agu, would you like to kick us off before I turn it over to Dr. Dow?
Sure. Also, want to name Commissioner Serrano, who's also been part of the committee.
Commissioner Serrano, I'm sorry, I left you off my notes. Thank you also to Commissioner Serrano for being on the committee.
Sure. Sure. I'll also make a couple, I think, thematic comments, and then really want to let Dr. Dow dive in, and I may have some things to say later. But first of all, thank you to the MHEC team, as well as all the folks who've given input so far on this, and again, there'll be even more input as we finish these goals and think about the plan going forward. What I want to do is say today, what you're going to see are, again, draft goals, and think of the draft goals as our North Star. If you imagine that we're going on a trip as a state, The goals are about deciding where we want to go. The exact route that we will take to get there is going to be part of the higher education plan. So today's about agreeing where do we want to go. How we get there, that's going to be a longer conversation that will be part of the planning process that will come after we decide where we want to go. So there'll be places where it's like, wait, this isn't clear, or hey, how do we define? It's more about, do we agree that we want to go here? So I want to make that really clear to those who are watching and those who have not been part of this process, and realize that's what the higher education state plan is going to be for. So I just want to name that number one. I think number two, and Commissioner Mott and Chair Mott, we've not talked about this yet. For our next meeting, you'll likely see a proposal from me about particular directives we want to give to the state plan group about particular things we want to make sure that they answer to get to that root clarity that I'm kind of talking about. So that will likely come later on. Data around certain definitions of things that you'll see are not quite firmed up yet. So that will come probably in our next meeting. But again, just remember, we're deciding on where we want to go. I think the third thing is two things are true. One, we in Maryland have led the nation in so many ways in higher education. Truly, all the segments who are represented here, ones who are not here, particularly when we look at other states, we have a lot to be proud of. We've gone very far. We've done so many great things. It is also true that to get to where we want to go, we will need to do a lot more, and we will need to go a lot farther. Those two things can be true. So as we think about and we propose some ambitious targets, hopefully targets that require us to do differently than we've done before, there's no way an indictment of what we've done. If anything, it honors what we've done, and if anything, has confidence that we can actually do even more because of what we've already done. I think the last thing, and you heard this from Secretary Rice or from Chair Motz, we will take a spirit of partnership here, if I can quote the governor, in partnership not just from our higher ed institutions. We will have deep conversations with industry, with local stakeholders, with nonprofit organizations who are working within this space. We want to have as wide a process as possible to make sure that we're taking in all the feedback, because again, this is about the higher education system that we want, but in many ways it's about what higher education system do we want for the type of state that we want. And in the end, a lot of people live in the state who come from a lot of different walks of life. We want to make sure that they're all represented here. Higher ed institutions, absolutely front and foremost, but they will not be the only ones, because we want to make sure that we have a plan that's fully reflective. So just want to frame that. And from there, I will be quiet and really want to throw it to Dr. Dow to walk through the specifics.
Great. Thanks, Commissioner Agu. Oh, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Agu. You have set the stage, and I really appreciate your remarks. Let me share my screen and just walk you through the memo. We do not need to belabor the point here, but I do want to emphasize the proposed goals that you have reviewed and we've discussed at previous meetings. These are, as Commissioner Agu said, just the North Star. It is where we want to go conceptually, and it is prioritizing these elements of higher education that will set the stage for the next iteration of the state plan. So this will be the foundation and how we organize our upcoming revised state plan for higher education. So you'll see in the memo, we are proposing that it is the goal of the state to accomplish 4 things. Eliminate completion gaps. And just as Commissioner Agu said, we're not quite sure how we're going to get there and how we will define completion gaps, but a commitment that is unacceptable, and that we really need to be looking at specific populations and initiatives to eliminate those completion gaps. So first and foremost, an equity-based agenda. Second, maintaining an attainment goal, that there is value in having an educated populace, and keeping that as a North Star as institutions think about how they engage with the general Maryland public, and thinking through ensuring that they offer programs that are meaningful. So right now it is proposed that we would do 65% will have a certificate or degree by 2030. That is still up for some consideration and further editing. The point is that we would maintain an attainment goal as we have with the current 55% by 2025. Third, that we would establish an annual goal for the number of students completing a credential of value. So there's a difference between having an attainment goal for the state as well as a production goal for the state. And there is significant interest to having both. There is value in having both. And so that is what that third goal would do, is emphasizing a production. For Maryland, there has been interest that it is not just, well, we're just going to produce a whole bunch of graduates. It's about producing graduates who are on a meaningful path forward. So right now we have the term credential of value, but a lot more work needs to go into defining what is a credential of value, what those paths look like, and digging deeper into that terminology. But again, conceptually buying into the idea that a production goal is also a valuable metric for understanding our post-secondary ecosystem. Finally, a fourth goal around research and innovation. This is to recognize that our colleges and universities in Maryland have a dual purpose and dual role, particularly our public institutions, not just producing an educated populace, but also producing knowledge and scholarship to further our economy and create spaces in which our residents live healthy and productive lives. And our research institutions do that work. So leveling that up, making that a priority in our state plan, and centering research and innovation for the benefit of our greater society. And that work really does start with our colleges and universities and the research, the original academic research that happens there in collaboration with industry partners. There is more in this memo that I'm sure you have reviewed, but let me take you to the end to walk you through our process and next steps. Where we are prepared to go next is sharing these goals more broadly at our upcoming Student Success Summit on November 14th and 15th. There at the Student Success Summit, attendees will have the opportunity to further reflect. Most, if not all, will have seen some iteration of these goals, but they will have the explicit opportunity to reflect on these goals with their peers at other colleges and universities. They will hear from national organizations to hear how other states are working through their own state goals, best practices and initiatives around student success, and how that aligns with these initiatives. And finally, an opportunity to start some very initial reflections and strategic planning of what this would mean for their institution. What would they need to change to align with some equity-based initiatives? What do we need to do to think about defining credentials of value? And so the 2024 Student Success Summit will really kick off the draft conversation of these goals, and will set the stage for our state plan writing in 2025. What's presented in the memo is a brief outline of meetings to be scheduled in 2025 that, again, are anchored in these goals and create spaces for us to hone in on these issues. In particular, we will need to figure out data sources for ongoing measurement and the appropriate benchmarking metrics that we need to hit in 2030, 2035, and beyond, and annual benchmarking. So these meetings, as proposed, would create those spaces for further discussions and final decisions. Commissioner Agu, I have heard you in past meetings. We are attempting, and I think it's very reasonable that we have a strong draft, if not a final draft, by the end of 2025, well in advance of our deadline of July 1st, 2026. So if we can keep to this kind of general schedule from late spring into the fall of next year, I think we will have plenty of opportunities to dig very deeply into these issues and come to consensus on how we move forward with our upcoming state plan. I will stop there and turn it back to, I will first turn it to Secretary Rye for any additional comments, and then back to the commissioners for discussion and any questions.
So again, I want to thank Commissioner Agu and all commissioners who have provided guidance. Also want to really appreciate all higher education community that has been given input on ongoing basis on these draft goals. And we look forward to working on these in the next months as well. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Dye and Dr. Rai and Dr. Dow. Commissioner Agu, question.
Less question, more. What I also want to share with the commission was some feedback that we gave during our last committee meeting on these goals, and hopefully that will set the stage for commissioners for other questions. And on balance, we were very complimentary. I think a couple of things that we named. One, right now the timeline, except for, I believe for the annual goal, for the attainment goal, I believe we have 2030. One of the things that we said was we may want to consider pulling out that timeline. If you remember, for our initial completion goals for 2025, we set those goals in 2013. So again, we gave ourselves 12 years to hit those. We might want to, and so I think we had a consensus of really not going no later than 2035. But again, I would leave that to this group to kind of decide, to give ourselves more time so that we can actually achieve the ambitious goals I think that we're setting forward. I think that's one. I think two, this is more as we think about the plan. We want to make sure that all the amazing efforts that MHAC is doing are reflected also in that plan. So for example, the amazing work that Dr. Dow was leading on non-credit, that is going to be a lever that we're going to use to hit some of these goals. Similarly, the transfer work, that is going to be a lever. We want to make sure that is reflected in this goal. So what we ideally want is that every work stream of value that MHAC is pushing is reflected in this plan and is part of the broader framework, not kind of dangling pieces of work. On degrees versus credentials of value, this is an important conversation, and let's just name it. This is a conversation that is a fraught one across the country. I think the way that I think it would be reflected with most commissioners, we do not want to be a battle between degrees and other types of credentials. It is a full spectrum. The economy requires all of it, and we want to make sure that no matter what path a student chooses, that path is robust. It leads to a place that they want to go to for themselves and their family. So I want to make sure that we do not want to set up an adversarial system, but the reality of the economy is that all these types of credentials are needed, and we don't want to act like that the degree is the only credential that matters. It is a powerful one, but it's not the only one, and we want to make sure that both are reflected. The last piece, and this is more thematic, and this is now Commissioner Agu speaking. I will not speak on behalf of everyone else. One of the things that we said was we wanted goals that we wouldn't just kind of trip and make, meaning we didn't want to set goals that we would just make anyway, candidly. We wanted to make sure that we had goals that actually would push our system, as we know it can, to do even more and even bigger and even better than it's already done. And so, candidly, I will speak for myself, we also want goals that push us and stretch us a bit as a system and as a state. And so I think that's really important. The last thing I'll say, and I'm channeling Commissioner Serrano here, on the credential of value piece, as someone who's the parent of an 8 and a 3-year-old, and I think about sending them to college at some point in the future or down an apprenticeship path, so on and so forth. The value question is real. I hear if you have anyone who is sending kids to college, that question is real. And so it's also, frankly, reacting to the people of Maryland, that this is a question that we have to consider as part of the plan. So I'm channeling you, Dr. Serrano, and hopefully I've captured that well. But Dr. Dow, I want to throw it to you as well as to the rest of the commission. But I hope the framing is helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner Agu. Very, very helpful. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Dr. Rai, question from you. Comment.
Yeah. So again, we heard from community colleges today and also from USM system, and Dr. Rin gave some good advice. And I think I just want to say that we will absolutely welcome those, and we will adjust our goals to make sure that those suggestions are included.
Great. All right. Thank you. Anything else on this topic before we move on? All right. The next topic, I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, I just want to thank Mr. Agu and the other commissioners and Dr. Dow for the work they've done thus far, and the stage setting I think today was really very helpful, and while we still have significant amount of work to be done, I really applaud the efforts they've made in getting us to this point. So thank you. I look forward to continuing this work.
Thank you, Commissioner
I
Burnham.
agree. Mhm.
Dr. Dow?
I would just, I appreciate all the support from the commissioners on this work. We have certainly spent quite a bit of time looking at what other states are doing in this area. Setting these state goals really does, again, I go back to Commissioner Agu's terminology, it really does create our North Star and centers where we need to be going for the next several years. So we are doing work that what you see here, it reflects what we see happening in other states, and it pushes the boundary for Maryland. So it will keep Maryland higher education competitive when we look at a national platform, and these goals are also specific or designed to be specific to the needs of Maryland. As well. We look at other states and they have slightly different goals when it comes to targeted initiatives based on what's happening in the state. I think that is evident in particularly our research goal. We've seen another state tackle the research goal and they're operationalizing it different. Here in Maryland, we're valuing things like startups, patents, translational research that leads to economic outcomes. And that is unique to Maryland. So I think I just want to also I say that all to take a step back and think about Maryland in the national context and why these goals are so important when we think about what other states are doing in the higher education realm.
One quick just process question. Dr. Dowd, Secretary Wright, do you need us to, as a commission, bless this at any point, or is this purely informational? I just want to be clear, we give you what you need as you proceed forward.
We would love your blessing. It does not need a formal vote at this point because realistically, as we've just addressed, there are still a lot of open-ended items. But your general blessing consensus that these will be our North Star moving forward. This can be the foundation for our state plan. We can move ahead with our Student Success Summit and plan an agenda around these elements. So a conceptual buy-in and support of this work moving forward would be very helpful at this point.
Yeah, and so I want to be clear there, and so I think the conversation to potentially be had amongst these commissions right now is this where we want to go? Are these buckets right? And I want to make sure that this group feels that before we go on, and because in about a month, I believe, a little less than, we actually are going to put this in front of a number of stakeholders, including our higher education leaders. So with that, sorry. Chair Mott, back to you, because I think there might be a conversation to be had among some of the commissioners if there are questions.
Sure. I see Commissioner Howe raising her hand.
I did. I got on my phone instead of the computer, so I could actually speak on the microphone. I just think I'm so proud of all this work that's been done. And having said that, the devil is in the details always when you try to implement these goals. They are certainly idealistic. And I hope that they're not just laudatory statements, but that there are some real teeth in the implementation going forward to get these goals achieved that let us actually achieve the goals that we think are the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Howe. And I completely agree. And I think we all agree. The devil is always in the details. Any other, just to Commissioner Agu's point, these are major goals. A lot of work has gone into them. Again, thanks to our fellow commissioners for leading the way. Any other discussion? Commissioner Thompson.
Yes, thank you to the team that put this initial report together. I'm thinking back to what Commissioner Agu said about the amount of time or the timeline. if it took 13 years for the first round to go through, just as an initial thought, what are you thinking in terms of a timeline, or how long or how much time by 2030, by 2035? And you may not be able to answer that, but just your initial thoughts. And then in your review of other states, did you have any idea from them about how long it took them to get to where they came up with a goal or timeline?
Sure, I'm happy to answer that, but
All
certainly
right.
want to. Okay, great. So whatever timeline we choose, there is very clear support that it needs to be data driven, and what is both reasonable at the same time challenges the status quo. So for each of those four goals, the timeline will vary. For the attainment goal, we are now thinking that 65% by 2030, based on the data and our progress so far in the current attainment goal, is probably still both realistic but pushes our boundaries. That 65% by 2030, very short turnaround, especially if we are not putting out a state plan with specific initiatives until the end of 2025. That really is only about 4 years when you think about it, and then probably even 3 years when you think about institutional initiatives and what they can do to move the marker within an academic year. So there has been interest to say, let's be realistic about implementing initiatives within the context of higher education for that attainment goal and push that to 2035 instead. Again, those metrics would have to be evidence-based and informed by existing data and information.
You know, and I was thinking of the credentialing of value with things changing so quickly in terms of the different types of credentials that are coming out and the different industries that are getting involved. For example, Google has their credentialing now that's happening. I'm sure many other companies will be working with states to get more and more people involved in their credentialing, so it can balloon into something that we can't even imagine right now. So just thinking about that in terms of, well, how far is so far? You know, and what else new is going to happen between now and then? You know, so many different fields. I'm looking forward to the summit to hear the feedback, you know, from the different institutions. Thanks again.
Absolutely. I'll just add another point there that, again, each goal is going to have slightly different benchmarks. So for example, with the production and credentials of value, I could see us setting something for the next 3 years and then revisiting it almost on an annual basis to say, are we hitting the mark? So that would be a much more short term. What are we saying? Let's do a reflection exercise and see what we need to revise. The attainment goal will be likely a longer runway. And then the research goal and equity goal will probably fall somewhere in between in a similar fashion. And that is the work that needs to be done in 2025. And final decisions, again, would live in our state plan for higher education.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Rai, did you want to add something?
I wanted to, but it has already been added. So that's very, very good. Again, you know, in 2013, 48 states around the country set goals for 2025, right? So, but many states have now goals similar for 2030, but they started looking at this 3-4 years ago. So we are starting a little bit from the behind. So we have to understand that. The other thing is that even if we have some goals for 2035, that doesn't mean that we will start looking at data in 2034. There will be leading indicators. This plan will have leading indicators year by year progress, where we are in 28, 2030, and things like that. So we will know if something is not working out, how to address those issues, not sleeping at the plan, right? So I think we'll be very actively working on this. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Rai and Dr. Dow and the whole MHEC staff team, and of course to Commissioners Agu, Serrano, Tabor, Stalin, Williams, and Dukes for leading the way on this. To Commissioner Agu's point, do we have a motion to move forward conceptually with these draft goals, with the understanding that we are seeking and hoping for input from the higher education community and from other communities, including the business community, labor community, other relevant state agencies, and even the K-12 MSDE community? Do we have a motion? So moved from Commissioner Wormack. Thank you.
I move forward. I move that we move forward with our conceptual plan.
Yes,
There's
draft
more work on,
goals
obviously.
with more input needed, but that this is basically the 12 of us, I think 9 of us are present, giving our seal of improvement to our 5 colleague commissioners who have led the way so far, saying the rest of the 12 of us endorse these goals and we want to move forward and get further input. Do we have a second?
Second.
Excellent. All those in favor? Aye. Any oppositions or abstentions? Okay, thank you. Speaking of draft and things, oh, sorry, was there a question?
Chair Mott, so sorry, this is, first of all, thank the rest of the commission. One thing I would also say is, as we think about input, if there are particular segments, organizations that use like, hey, we'd love to make sure that there's direct conversation and input from them, please just let Dr. Dow and team or myself know, and we're happy to do that. So, but again, either segments of society or particular kind of organizations, because we do want to make sure that that's as robust as possible. Thank you again to everyone, including the MHEC team.
Yes, I agree. It doesn't have to be one of the ones that just I named off the top of my head. We want as much input as possible. So speaking of drafts and previews, our next topic is again with Dr. Dow, and the topic is a discussion of the duplication analysis. My fellow commissioners will remember that when we have our hearings for academic program review, one of the factors that we are to take into account by law is an analysis of duplication of academic courses. And so for the first time today, Dr. Dow is going to be presenting to us a preview, as she has done with past regulations, of what the agency is thinking to move forward with the understanding that there's going to be further input from the institutions of higher education. I believe that there is a date already on the books with the leadership of the various segments, so that they will very much get to weigh in on this as it affects the institutions of higher education. But Dr. Dow and Dr. Rai wanted us as commissioners to just see this initial thought for the first time. So there is no approval sought today. This is just a preview, and we're just seeing it for the first time. So Dr. Dow, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Motz, and thank you for that introduction. Before I share my screen, I want to just set the stage a minute. House Bill 1244 has changed some definitions around duplication and the expectation for the commission. We have discussed this internally at length since the passage of the bill last spring. And what we are about to present reflects those internal discussions. So I want to be clear, we have not presented this information to our segment leaders, and you all are this will be the first time that you are seeing some of this information formally as a response to implementing House Bill 1244. I would like to share this is based on not only my knowledge, certainly the consulting with our Assistant Attorney General, Soma Kadia and Kimberly Ward, as well as staff who have been at the agency for years and have been working through these analyses and academic program proposals frequently. So what is presented here reflects that core knowledge, that base knowledge that has been obtained over the years. with an understanding of the legislative intent and where the legislature wants us to go when it comes to academic program review in the broad context of higher education in Maryland. So I want you all to know that this is well informed. Two, we recognize this is going to be the first time you're seeing this, and that this is the first time we are really talking about this publicly. And three, the reason why we are sharing this with you all today is for you to think about this, review it, and certainly provide any immediate feedback that you see. We will be taking this to a broader group, the program advisory process, the program process, Program Review Process Advisory Council, PRPAC, will be meeting in a month, and they will be doing the deep dive of providing very technical feedback on some of these elements. So let me get into it. I will share my screen. These slides will be posted to our website after today's meeting. But let me walk you through what we are thinking. Okay, as a reminder, these are the changes that House Bill 1244 made to the terms unreasonable and unnecessary program duplication. The bill separates these two terms into separate conceptual understanding of program duplication. Unreasonable program duplication is now harm to the state or students attending institutions in Maryland. Unnecessary program duplication is in violation of the state's equal education opportunity obligations under state and federal law. So we have two different concepts of unreasonable and unnecessary duplication. Today's discussion will focus solely on unreasonable duplication. Unnecessary duplication really sits with with our AGs right now, and they are doing quite a bit of research regarding our state and federal law obligations for equal educational opportunities.
Dr. Zhao?
Yes.
On the quick question on the harm to state and then to students, there's no mention of institutions there. So it's like, because quite often we hear, if you do this, then this institution will be hurt badly, or this program will be hurt badly. That's out of the equation now?
Correct. That is out of the equation for the bill. The legislature deleted that consideration for unreasonable program duplication and replaced it with harm to the state or student.
What would be an example of a harm to the state? Sorry, weird question.
No, great question. Can I ask you hold that until we get to a few slides later?
Okay, that's fine. Thanks.
Perfect. Because you're right there, right? That's exactly where we need to go. So per the law, the commission is required to adopt regulations. So this is the first of probably several presentations over the next few months that will be the basis for regulatory changes. So we feel like it's too soon to give you draft regulations, but that is the end goal here, is to move this all into a regulatory format. The legislature did identify two priorities for this analysis. One, meeting state and regional workforce needs and preserving existing programs that are able to meet those state and regional workforce needs. And two, collaborations between institutions. This is particularly apparent not only in the bill, but certainly in the work group conversations that happened nearly a year ago. Additionally, the legislature has said we have to use baseline data and common sources developed in conjunction with Department of Labor and Commerce. These are the appendices that we are actively working on that identify in-demand occupations and existing programs, as well as the lack of academic programs for those in-demand and emerging fields. So again, this presentation is focusing solely on unreasonable program duplication. More to come on the topic of unnecessary program duplication. So here we are in thinking through the framework for unreasonable duplication. We have said that the purpose, one, to set the stage, the purpose of unreasonable duplication is to ensure that state resources are appropriately distributed among institutions of higher education, and to ensure institutions are collaborating to provide a wide spectrum of educational programs. We get the question frequently, both from institutions as well as outside entities, why are you even reviewing for duplication? Why is this even a thing? So these are two reasons that consistently come up when we talk about why we care about why we care about unreasonable program duplication. So centering state resources and centering this idea of collaboration. A few process notes for you all to think about. So this is, again, draft. This is what we're thinking. We love your feedback. Institutions would be expected to use the same analysis in letters of intent, proposals, letters of intent are twice there, letters of intent, proposals, and objections. So this is not just an analysis for MHEC. This is an analysis that everybody will be using moving forward. There seems to be a misunderstanding that it's only an analysis that MHEC does. We really need to have institutions doing this work as well. Once duplication is identified, the institution will be required to revise the proposal or seriously explore opportunities for collaboration or cooperation. We have had institutions that say, nope, we are moving ahead. We are going to do this program. And we really need institutions to take a step back and revisit what they are proposing, as well as think through collaboration and cooperative opportunities. And finally, through this process, institutions with existing programs will be required to engage regarding collaboration. We have had instances where an institution with an existing program has been resistant, reluctant, perhaps slow to respond. When another institution is truly interested in collaborating and thinking through a larger pathway for student success in a particular field or domain. Let me walk you through some draft general rules. Oh, Commissioner Agu. Yes, and please do stop me and ask questions. Yes.
Sure. So I just want to be clear. So what I also read is this is not just an analysis that will be used when there's a conflict. When you are getting a proposal for a new program from an institution, the data sources must be the same. And so if the data that we all have agreed on everyone's going to use does not support a program, you almost shouldn't propose it.
Correct. Right.
Okay. I just want to say that out loud.
That is what we are proposing for you all to think about and consider. Yes.
Thank you.
Looks like Commissioner Serrano has a question too, Dr. Dow.
Yeah, on the issue of the same analysis. So if one institution wants to rely on a national body's data and the other one wants to rely on a regional body's data, how do they signal to each other that, like, we're going to go with the regional body's data and not the national body's data?
That will live in the annual appendix in the workforce analysis. And that information, so we will debate that outside of an academic program proposal. And that will happen with the workforce. We have a work group that will be convening to identify workforce need, and we can use that space as well as a public space, again, to identify common sources and come to consensus for a particular field. Commissioner Serrano, please. Oh.
Yeah, so the process that it is now is pretty long, and they can drag out for a while. How does this, I can imagine it sounds like it's going to lengthen the process a little bit more. So, like, realistically, if we had a 3-month window by which, one institution proposes, the other one objects, and then we have a hearing and so forth, would it now be 6 months? Would it now be a year? Like what are we looking at?
Great question. As of right now, we would not be extending the process. We would, so by law, when MHEC receives a complete proposal, first we have to deem the proposal complete, but once we receive that complete proposal, we have 60 days for the secretary to make a decision. And then should an institution be dissatisfied with that decision, there's another 60 days for commission review. So the first 60 days is set by, and please, one of our AGs, correct me if I get this wrong, the first 60 days is set by statute in terms of the secretary has to make a decision within those 2 months. We can ask for an extension, but we really do try to work hard to stay within those 60 days. And then the 60 days for the commission review is set by regulations. And I see Ms. Katia raising her hand for correction on that.
I just wanted to remind you, we're actually going to be in the next item, looking to adopt the amendments to the review meeting regulations that we discussed in July, which actually changes that 60 days slightly. But yes, I would say overall, another 2 months is probably a good sense of time.
I will share in terms of timing, what we're trying to do here is interject the MHEC process earlier in the institutional planning process to say when a faculty or a department says, hey, we want to do a new program, they are clear from the get-go what the expectations are when it comes to duplication and duplication analysis. Right now, it doesn't seem to be that's the case. There's an institutional process where institutions are discussing internally. They get it to a point where it's an MHEC proposal, but those MHEC considerations may not be part of the initial planning that happens at the institution. So what we are trying to do here is interject that MHEC element sooner into the institutional process before it comes to our agency. Ms. Katia.
And just to be clear, that earlier intervention is now required by law. That was one of the changes in HB 1244. Letters of intent must be submitted a certain amount of time ahead of time, and MHEC is required to discuss possible duplication with the institution that submitted it. So that is now baked into the process so that hopefully we don't have these conflicts once the proposal is actually submitted.
But I hear you, Commissioner Serrano, on timing and being thoughtful about that. And we will keep that as part of our consideration as we think through these elements. We do want higher education to be responsive to industry needs, and certainly do not want to create additional barriers that may not allow an institution to be responsive to those needs. So balancing that certainly will be important. Okay. So some draft general rules. Again, these are for you all to reflect upon. There's 8 of them, but please don't be overwhelmed. We'll go quickly. First, unreasonable program duplication does not exist unless the 2 programs are at the same degree or certificate level. So we're going to say a bachelor's degree may not be considered duplicative of an associate's degree. An upper division certificate should not be considered duplicative of a bachelor's degree, so on and so forth. They really have to be programs within the same degree or certificate level to initially even be considered duplicative. There's value in having an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, an upper level certificate. Gives variability in the types of degrees within a particular industry. That is not in and of itself duplicative. Second, unreasonable program duplication does not exist if the development of a new program is identified as needed to meet a state or regional workforce shortage through the annual appendix. So that's why this appendix will need to be updated every year. We'll need to evaluate workforce metrics, how many people are in those occupations, what we know about industry, industry growth. So if there is a particular program on a list that we have said, listen, we need more people in this field. This is a growing industry. We don't have enough programs. Then we're going to say that is not unreasonably duplicative. But I will say that will change. That has the potential of changing year to year. So this then does require institutions to maybe work faster to respond to our annual appendices. So a rule to think about. A third rule to think about. Unreasonable program duplication is most likely I'll stop and go back, Commissioner Serrano.
Yeah, the appendices. Who puts those together? Like, is it Department of Labor, or is it MHEC, or who compiles it?
So it is a collaborative effort between MHEC, Labor, Commerce, and other organizations as needed. It will come to the commission for final adoption. And so we are again, actively working on the first iteration, which would be the 2025 version. We have the rules on how we are defining in-demand occupations. We are working through to identify the relevant academic programs through that SIP to SOC crosswalk. And again, this is in collaboration with Department of Labor and Department of Commerce. Future iterations of these appendices will do a deeper dive. Part of the reason why we will do a deeper dive is we will have a dedicated position in the near future, a director of workforce need at MHEC, who will take the lead in this work to be able to talk with licensing boards, national organizations, and again, do that deep dive in collaboration with labor. We just closed the recruitment, I think, yesterday for that position. So I'm hopeful that we will have that person on board by the end of the calendar year. But nonetheless, I hope that answers your question. These lists are in development with primarily labor and commerce, with potential input from other entities like the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center, licensing boards, national organizations. It will be updated annually. It will come to the commission for final adoption. You will get drafts of it along the way. So I imagine you guys are going to get a draft in December. And that is how these lists will be developed. I hope that answers your question, Commissioner Serrano.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Okay, third general rule. Unreasonable program duplication is most likely to exist within specialty programs, subdisciplines, professional degrees, and occupation-specific programs. Something that the commission could do is publish a list of existing unique programs within any degree or certificate level, which may not be proposed at another institution without prior permission. So thinking about the flip of general programs that maybe every institution has, let's also think about the unique programs that maybe a select few institutions have and say that these are not programs unless we really have a good justification. We really need to support institutions with these unique programs. Commissioner Agu.
So a quick question. When you say permission, do you mean permission from the institution or permission from MHEC?
Permission from MHEC.
Okay. Second question, and you addressed it a little bit. An extenuating circumstance would be the appendix says we need more X, therefore that's why.
Right, exactly. Right. While we see that this is a unique program at Dow University, we need more people to do that thing. Other institutions need to develop a similar program, or Dow University needs to grow their program to accommodate more students and graduate students in those fields.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, a fourth rule. Duplication is presumed to not exist if an existing program is basic, common, or a core program at a particular degree or certificate level. This gets to the idea that there are some programs, particularly at the undergrad level, that really all colleges should offer. So we could publish a list of specific, basic, common, or core programs within any degree or certificate level. Defining basic, common, or core programs varies depending on degree level. So what every institution may need to have at the bachelor's degree may be something different than making sure that if you're offering master's programs, every institution offers a general master's program in a particular field. So something to think about as a general rule around duplication. Fifth general rule. Because every community college in the state serves a different region in the state, that is their identity. They serve a particular county or a handful of counties. Duplication of associate's degree programs, a lower division certificate, or other academic program at a community college by another community college is not unreasonably duplicative. So the community colleges could get a carve out here because, again, they are there to serve their immediate county. So duplication at the community college level is tolerable for that purpose. Think on that. Okay, sixth rule. At the bachelor's degree level, again, basic, common, or core programs in the liberal arts, social sciences, theoretical sciences, business, and education are not unreasonably duplicative. So again, we would refer to a possible list of specific basic, common, or core programs. And right now, one thought is to talk about things like liberal arts, social sciences, theoretical sciences, business, and education. Should every college have an undergraduate psychology degree? Sure. Should every undergrad institution have a psychology degree that leads to a clinical training? I don't know. Same thing with business. Should every undergrad have a business degree? Seems kind of okay. Should every undergrad have a business degree that is focused in cybersecurity? Ooh, that could get into territory and unique programs. So we would need to think through that. But this idea of there are some programs that should be allowable at every undergrad institution. Commissioner Warmack.
Thank you, Dr. Dow. The only thought I had, and I know we're going to chew on this, is offering courses at a community college that are online only could impact another institution in any region of the state. So I'm going to chew on that one, as you suggested.
Yes, exactly. Admittedly, we have not in these basic rules have talked about what we would call modality. Yeah. As a consideration. It does come up later on, but good point and noted. Thank you for that. Okay, bachelor's degree. Duplication of master's degree, post-bac certificates, and graduate certificates. Again, common programs in the traditional liberal arts, social sciences, and theoretical sciences are not unreasonably duplicative. Think on that. And again, we would refer to our specific to our list of basic, common, or core programs. And we would possibly define or have a very limited understanding of what a traditional liberal arts, social science, or theoretical science at the master's level would look like. So just a general master's in philosophy. Should that just be allowable at master's degree granting institutions? And then finally, a general rule, anything at the doctoral program shall be reviewed for unreasonable program duplication. We just automatically review all doctoral programs, whether they are applied, theoretical, academic in nature. All doctoral programs go under our unreasonable program duplication review.
How much would that add to your workload, Dr. Dow? And then, sorry, I didn't see, Dr. Serrano has a question and Mr. Agu has a question.
Sure. I don't think it would add to our workload. I think it would clarify to institutions our expectations. I mean, we review all programs for duplication as is, but it would create some swim lanes around or some boundaries of what we mean when it is a core liberal arts undergrad degree versus an applied doctoral degree. and where we would say, listen, this really does merit some further analysis around duplication.
I just meant for number 8 in particular, for the doctoral
Oh.
degrees. Like, do you have a sense of what percentage are challenged now? I don't want an unfunded mandate where you're bringing a lot of extra work on yourselves if people aren't unhappy with it. I'm just trying to get that practical understanding.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. I don't think it would change our workload, quite honestly. I think it just would clarify expectations.
Okay.
Frankly, yep.
Ms. Kadia, the lawyer, I always am going to defer to our lawyer. Ms. Kadia, if you want to jump in, and then Commissioner Agu and whoever's after that.
I just wanted to note that most of our institutions in the state, publics at least, are not authorized to offer doctoral degrees. So we're actually talking about a small subset of institutions that would be included in this category.
Okay, that's helpful.
So it's really not a giant number.
I see. Thank you. That's helpful. Commissioner Agu and then Commissioner Serrano.
Sure. Just on this number 8, I know you're all still doing this SIP-SOC crosswalk. Theoretically, if a doctoral program ended up as one of those programs that was on a list, I can imagine for certain high technology, quantum, for example, so on and so forth. I imagine that would be like a carve out for number 8. I'm thinking about how some of these regs would run into each other. So I imagine if there was a doctoral program that ended up on that appendix, we would say, okay, hopefully that would, again, reduce your workload in a reasonable way.
Exactly. Yep. Which is why it's an earlier rule. That workforce need, prioritizing workforce need, again, consistent with what the legislature has directed us to do. That is a higher level rule than this rule here. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Commissioner Serrano?
Yeah, I just so in a situation that we have like an institution that has a program, say the program is not graduating anybody, or they're graduating, they're taking in 20 people per year, they're graduating 1 every 3 years. Is there anything in this that says, hey, your program is not that good, maybe we should allow another program to take its place because this program is not filling that need? Is there any space in these rules for that?
Absolutely. So that, again, back to our workforce analysis, the appendices to the state plan will highlight some of that work. So giving existing programs the opportunity to say, okay, one, we have to establish that there is a need for more graduates in a particular field. Step 2, understanding our existing programs that produce graduates in that field. Some existing programs may say, I'm at capacity, either because of an accreditation, because of resources, other reasons. An institution may say, nope, you know what? Another institution absolutely should open up a new program because I have hit the max. We have hit our max in terms of student enrollment and capacity to serve students. Alternatively, an institution may say, you know what? We can grow. We're going to redirect resources to hire more faculty. We're actually building out a new building to expand, physical resources to train and provide education to our students. So we will be growing our program. All of that will live in these appendices, and giving existing programs, again, an opportunity to grow before we open up the door to say other institutions need to create new programs because our current programs are not meeting the market demand.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm sorry, me?
Yeah. Yes, Chair Motz, if you're okay with me calling on Ms. Kadia, sorry.
I just wanted to note that is also baked into the statute. We are required to preserve existing programs, but existing programs that are meeting workforce need. That's what's in the statute. So if a program's not meeting that, we actually, it's not one of the programs that we're required preserve in a sense.
Okay. Commissioner Agu, sorry, Chair Motz.
No, let me just name to answer the question that Dr. Serrano laid out there. We don't have Dr. Schmertz, but this very important conversation of not just who graduated, but what happened to those people. Meaning, if I trained a bunch of material scientists who are going to work in the quantum field, but they were not employed for various reasons in our quantum industry, we can't begin. So that's part of satisfying the workforce needs. So to get to this question, it's not simply a throughput question, which is how many people graduated. It's actually, did they end up filling a billet that an actual employer needed to kind of get to their economic goals? So I don't want to say it's quite identical, but that's the data question you have to answer to get at the analysis that he's talking about. I just want to say that out loud, because it is an important point in the question.
Noted, Commissioner Agu, and we will certainly work to incorporate that in future iterations of the appendices of what's happening to recent graduates in these in-demand fields. Of note that we hear, are we actually sending, so it's one thing to produce them, are we now sending those graduates out of state? Are they getting jobs elsewhere? And that's why it's in demand here in Maryland. We're actually producing enough graduates, but for whatever reason, they're leaving Maryland. And so then that becomes a different problem. And to your point, we'll need MLDS data to understand those dynamics. And that is on the to-do list for inclusion in future iterations of the annual appendices.
I will say one other thing to make this even more complicated, which is outside of these regs, which is and actually Dr. Dukes brought this up in our last committee meeting, which is, what do you do with someone who is educated here, works somewhere else, but actually still lives here? Someone from Prince George's County, happens a lot, so on and so forth. So how do we judge that? Not to be answered here, that's a longer term question, but it is one that I think also have to be answered. But back to you all.
Great, thank you. Okay, so those are some draft general rules. Again, just setting the stage. Let me get us into the actual analysis that we would conduct to determine if there is duplication. Okay, so we have a statement here that I would like us to hold to, because as you, particularly for the new commissioners, but certainly for our more veteran commissioners, determining duplication is hard. And we really have been struggling internally. We really wanted to come to the table with a set of metrics, thresholds. If the proposal does this, and this, then it's absolutely duplicative, done. It's hard to do that. So we have this statement here that the determination of duplication is a qualitatively analytic process that cannot be determined by a particular set of metrics, but it instead depends on the unique circumstances in each situation. And so what I will share with you are the circumstances that we think are important to determining duplication. We welcome, and so this is certainly to our commissioners, anybody watching this presentation, and the general public, if there are a set of metrics, we are happy to entertain those metrics. But it is hard. We have struggled to come up with if-then rules, much like what I just presented. Those if-then rules that I presented seem reasonable, palatable. But when we get into the circumstances that I'm about to explain, it's tricky, and you'll see. So we want to put that out there, that this is a qualitative analysis, and it's hard to have check boxes, and if you've checked 4 of the boxes, then it's unreasonable duplication. So some draft steps. First, we do an analysis of the content. Is the content of the program, the 2 programs, substantially similar? If not, then it's not unreasonably duplicative. If it is, then we would ask the question, is the duplication unreasonable that it would cause harm to the student or state, So kind of, we're just starting with a broad content analysis. Are the programs similar by content. So if we break that up, our content analysis, we would have basic indicators, which I'll get to in a minute. And we can also do a course analysis. So we would first go through our basic indicators. And if we find that the basic indicators demonstrate a substantial difference between the content of the proposed program and the existing program, then we would say unreasonable program duplication does not exist. So, I'll get into the basic indicators. And then of course we could do a course analysis. So let me dive into both of these to talk about content similarity. So some basic indicators that we currently use in our review, and ones that we think could be leveled up and more predominant in our understanding of duplication. So certainly looking at program learning objectives, projected competencies and skills, what the program expects students to know and be able to do, intended employment upon completion, where the program intends students to be eligible for employment, which is slightly different than learning objectives and projected competencies. Recognition by licensing boards or certification, is this a stackable credential? And then certainly some basic indicators like the program title, the SIP code to be used, as well as program accreditation. So we would review these, and again, it's hard to say, well, if 3 out of these 7, is it 7? 3 out of these 7 boxes, not unreasonably duplicative, but if 4 out of 7, then we're over, then it is unreasonably. There's kind of a balance here depending on the context, industry, program that we're talking about. So looking at these basic indicators would be our first step to determine unreasonable duplication. Then, if needed, we could go into a course-by-course analysis, which we have done in the past and we can continue to do, where we look at the specific courses that the program requires. We'd look at course titles, course objectives, course descriptions. If the program has experiential learning requirements like an internship or a clinical placement, if applicable, any requirements to develop original scholarship. We see this often in the graduate programs, particularly applied graduate programs, where original scholarship is not the priority, but learning applied skills in the field is the priority. So thinking about a much more traditional graduate program versus an applied graduate program. And any available concentrations or specialties within the program's design. So again, back to this idea, we would first look at those basic indicators and then potentially do this course-by-course analysis. And so that would be our content analysis in our first step of unreasonable duplication. Once we decide that, yes, okay, we've said this is duplicative, we would also want to look at workforce need. If there is no workforce need, demonstrated need for graduates of these programs, then we would say that program duplication is unreasonable. So we need to, again, for the legislature, prioritize this idea of contextualizing workforce need. Other factors for us to consider to determine if the duplication is unreasonable is this idea of program modality and the geographic distance between the institutions. So Commissioner Warmack, this is where we would bring in online programs and particularly face-to-face programs and their geographic distance. If the intended student population for the program, who the intended student population is for the program, if there's different admissions requirements and what the existing student body looks like, student demand for the program, if there's significant interest for a particular program, but again, an institution says we're at capacity, we cannot accept more students, that would be a consideration for unreasonable duplication or reasonable duplication. Availability of sufficient faculty, the mission of each institution, certainly potential opportunities for the institutions to collaborate, and really other factors that may assist the secretary in making a determination. So this is So let me back us up a little bit. We'd first decide if it's duplicative. Now we're going to decide if it's unreasonable. And these are the considerations that we would think about in the context of, is it unreasonable? And again, it's hard to make check boxes here to decide, yes, if the two programs are geographically close, absolutely unreasonable duplication. But what if they're admitting different types of students? So it's going to be a give and take on weighting some of these elements depending on the context of the proposed program. But these are some of the considerations for what would mean unreasonable. And then Commissioner Serrano, to your point of harm, these are some harms that we have encountered with recent proposals and what we have discussed internally. Harm could be inefficient or an inappropriate use of state resources. That would be harm to the state to duplicate state resources to two different institutions, when in fact one institution can grow their program and expand their resources to offer that academic program. So think on that. Is that harm to the state? Interference with state statutory responsibility regarding our HBCUs and what that means. That is harm. If applicable, potential unavailability of clinical placements for students, that is harm to students because they wouldn't necessarily be able to complete their program of study. And harm could be demonstrated through changes to the program or opportunities within the programs, leading to the lack of available faculty advisors, increases in program costs, or increases in time to completion. So we've heard the argument, well, if you have another program, I'm going to have to come up with my own resources. My own resources are going to be passed down to students through increased tuition. So there's kind of a logic change, and that is harm to the student that we could see. So think on these as potential harm considerations. My last slide, just next steps. So Commissioner Chair Motz, as you noted, we have the Program Review Process Advisory Council. We have our first meeting scheduled for November 20th. They are going to get these materials and we will do a deep dive of all of these elements. That Program Review Process Advisory Council is comprised of campus presidents, provosts, and relevant staff at the institutions. It's a 21-member advisory council. It has a diverse array of representation from our community colleges, public 4 years, and private and independent institutions. And so you might remember you all approved the bylaws for this advisory council at the July meeting. And this is where rubber hits the road. We will get their input from the get-go on all of these elements. We will come back to you at the December 11th commission meeting with updates and how that first meeting went and where we need to go next and what this all looks like. And certainly in the interim, feedback can be sent to me, care of Dr. Silva, our Associate Director for Program Review, and that way we can incorporate that. But let me stop there and see what questions you might have. I certainly appreciate the questions that you've already given and the feedback. But that is where we are with unreasonable duplication. Commissioner Serrano.
Yeah, just on the council that you mentioned, I think we might have discussed this before, but there are no students on that council, right?
No, there are no students on that council simply because it is about process. I do believe we talked about having a student on the council. We can entertain that if that is something that the commission wants to entertain. But as of right now, because this is so much about process, it seemed it would be hard to identify students who could get into the weeds on some of these elements. But that's not to say that we are not opposed to it. That was just some of the logic behind not having a student present.
I believe we also talked about, this may have been for me, I remember now, if sharing the outputs of that committee with the student advisory council so that they can give direct feedback as well, making that just part of the process. That might be a way, or that might be a way to kind of square that circle and get to the same point. I know Commissioner Serrano, I believe when we talked about this last, the message of having a student on there, I think was something that you had talked about. But process-wise, we might be able to get to the same point with that connection between the Student Advisory Council and this council. But that was, I believe, where we left the discussion last.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Noted. We will do that in practice. Absolutely. So in future iterations, and I can confirm that and incorporate that. Yes, we can do that process-wise. Absolutely.
Questions or comments for Dr. Dow? Commissioner Thompson.
Yes, I'd be also particularly interested in the collaboration, whole notion of collaboration and feedback from the meeting that's coming up. Back with your goal 3, and that's way back on your slides because we don't have those. For item 3, is collaboration built in there at all as a consideration? And if you could restate that number 3, I'm sorry, I don't have it.
No.
It's way back, and I apologize. Okay, yes. Is there any thought within this particular program goal to have collaboration?
I think the short answer is yes.
Okay.
we can certainly work to incorporate that, specifically with this kind of general rule. I will kind of clarify, this is where in the process, we will emphasize that collaboration needs to happen at the front end.
Front end, right.
Yeah. But certainly in the context here with specialty programs, professional degrees, larger career pathways, collaboration is essential between institutions.
Yes.
To share the diversity of the institutions that we have. So yes, Commissioner Thompson, that is great feedback. We will incorporate that into this rule.
I'd love to hear the feedback, regarding collaboration around that. Thank you.
Sure, we will make sure to add that to the agenda or find a way to explicitly talk about it at the upcoming council meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Agu?
Sure. Just very tactful. I believe it's your rule 8, or the one that mentions clinical placements, or maybe it's rule where was it?
Experiential learning requirements and opportunities.
But basically that, in terms of the analysis, that basically a dearth of clinical placements, or that would be created, would be potential harm. In healthcare, it makes total sense. Obviously, we're Maryland, so we think about that a lot. I'm thinking about as well. I don't have great examples here, but I'm thinking about. I know, for example, in like the advanced manufacturing space, at times, if you're getting a certification in a certain space, it will require a certain amount of time on a site showing that you can do X, Y, Z. Yeah, obviously, in the apprenticeship space, this is rife, so on and so forth. So I might just, if we can make the language a little more inclusive of potential of those types of things that are just outside the healthcare space, I think that's helpful. I don't have a great example right now, but just to leave ourselves the room if that were to come up in the future.
Great. Yeah, we can adjust the language to be more inclusive.
Yeah, on-site requirements, something like that. I'm sure there's a word for it. But yeah, that just popped in my head as I saw it.
Noted. Thank you.
Sorry, I just hit the applause emoji by mistake, although I do think it's a good idea. Other questions or
I took that
comments?
as very intentional, actually, Chair Motz. You could have left me with the impression that that was meant from me on purpose.
Dr. Dow, and to you and your team and the lawyers, Ms. Smith Ward and Ms. Katie, we can tell a lot of work has gone into this, and it's a really great initial draft to share for feedback with the institutions on November 20th. So thank you. You clearly thought through things, and folks are going to have strong opinions, and they should. And it's always easier to start with something written down. So you've really provided a very strong starting point. So thank you for that. Ms. Kadia?
I just wanted to give a specific shout out to Dr. Silva, our Associate Director of Program Review. She was absolutely essential in developing the curriculum duplication review, and she put a lot of work into that.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Silva. All right, I think we're moving to unless there are any other questions or comments from my fellow commissioners. Dr. Dow?
So if I may just end with this final thought, think on all of this. We know that I just gave you a lot of information. We will come back to you at the December commission meeting with some additional reflections. But I welcome any thoughts in the interim, and certainly open that to the public as well as a way to provide us feedback even outside of the advisory council meeting. So this is something for everybody to reflect on, and more to come at the December meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to our final agenda item, and continuing the trend of the enormous amount of work the agency and its lawyers have done in the wake of the legislation that was passed just a few months ago this year. I turn it over to Ms. Smith Ward and Ms. Kadia for some conversation about final adoption of regulations.
I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of the reg process before I get into the actual recommendations. So the majority of you have not been through the entire regulatory process. It really is broken into two. There's commission approval, and then after that, there's a number of things that happen, including publication in the Maryland Register, public comment, various waiting periods. And then the second part of it is it comes back to the commission for final adoption. Most of the time, this is sort of a pro forma legal thing that just needs to happen to make sure that these become effective, particularly for MHEC, because it's actually fairly rare for MHEC to get any public comments. So if public comments were to come along, then there might be some more information or more steps in there that would happen. But at this point in time, the three proposals that are eligible for final adoption by law have not received any public comment, so I've brought them before you for you to adopt. There's three of them. One of them is the regulations for the Promise Scholarship Program. Second is the amendments to the regulations for the Student Loan Debt Relief Tax Credit Program. And the third is the new, the amendments to the review meeting process, which I know you are all eagerly awaiting. There's one deviation from standard procedure in the review meeting amendments. So typically, after final adoption, the regulations or amendments become effective 10 days after the notice is published in the Maryland Register. However, agencies have the option to choose a later date. And here, so it's not actually that much later. If everything goes as planned with DSD, the regulations would be effective on November 25th. But just to have a very clear date after which institutions will know, okay, these new rules are in effect, Dr. Dow has asked that we have an effective date of December 1st for the review meeting amendments. So after that, I will leave it to you. There's three recommendations. I'm happy to read them if you would like, but I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Kadia. Before we ask, and I will be asking you to read them, please, but before that, are there any questions or comments from the commission? All right, Ms. Kadia, if you could read them and tee them up for us for a motion, that would be great.
Okay, so recommendation, actually we do need to do three different motions and three different votes on these. Recommendation 1, it is recommended that the commission approves for final adoption the enclosed regulatory proposal, which is in your commission book, for repeal of the current regulations and replacement with new regulations for the Maryland Community College Promise Scholarship Program.
Do we have a motion? I'll move it. So moved. We have a second?
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition or abstentions? All right, it's unanimous. Thank you.
All right, recommendation 2. It is recommended that the commission approves for final adoption the enclosed regulatory proposal for amendments to the regulations for the Student Loan Debt Relief Tax Credit Program.
Do we have a motion?
I make a motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Serrano. Do we have a second?
I just
Second.
wanted, Commissioner Howe is raising her hand, but not saying it
Oh.
out loud. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, she's not on my screen. All right, thank you. Commissioner Howe, we have a second from you. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition or abstentions? Right, unanimous. And the last one, Ms. Kadia.
Recommendation 3, it is recommended that the commission approves for final adoption the enclosed regulatory proposal for amendments to the regulation for the review meeting process within academic program review with an effective date of December 1st, 2024.
Do we have a motion?
I motion.
Thanks, Commissioner Serrano. Do we have a second?
I see Commissioner Howe again.
Thanks, Commissioner Howe. All those in favor, say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
oppositions or abstentions? All right, it's unanimous. Thank you, Ms. Kadia and Ms. Ward. All right, I think that brings us to the end of our agenda. I was remiss in not calling for a motion to adjourn, which is always the most popular motion. So if there's nothing further, Dr. Rye or anyone else or fellow commissioners, can we have a motion to adjourn?
So
Motion to
moved.
adjourn.
Second? All right, all in favor?
Second.
Aye.
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 Any opposition or abstention? All right, well, thank you all, and hope to see everyone at the summit on Friday, November 15th. There is an evening session for commissioners and college presidents on the evening of the Thursday right before November 14th. So I know Dr. Dow will be sharing the final details with us, but hopefully that's on your calendar, and we'll see you all then. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.